punctuation in it, right? So I don't know if she's so we're putting our own barriers between us. I remember growing up as a kid, we would sit around the dinner table for an hour or two afterward, talking with mom and dad and our brothers and sisters and so on. We don't do that now. And each step we take.
All right, let's start it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI, Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry consortium committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. I'm the co-host, Isabella, here with another co-host, Manuel, and our awesome guest today, Bill. Hello, Bill. Welcome to our second conversation together. So great to have you.
Thank you, Isabella. It's great to be here. I love these. I love these chats with you too.
Awesome. So thanks to these talk series, the interviews, we get to connect with great minds to together discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. And before we start, a little bit about Bill to our audience. Bill is a futurist. Love the title. Happy to meet another futurist aside from myself. And also, he's an awesome author. He authored two books. One is called The Strategic Planning in This Age of Disruption. And the other one is called The Four Horsemen, Envisioning 2030. And it's #1 Amazon best-selling in business planning. And he's also the board of directors of THICA and of Cornell Scott Hill Health Center in Connecticut, New Haven. And so to start our conversation, usually we leave it out to you, to the guest. What's your vision? What's your thought on the current trend or your imagination of sustainability, ESG, and digital transformation as a futurist?
Great question, Isabella.
Mm-hmm.
Great question. Several thoughts come to mind. Let me see if I can work with the first one. Is the progress that we have made as a society, the progress that we've made. I started doing strategic planning in 1980, so that's been 40 years now. And back in 1980, in the business classes, we talked about social responsibility, which I think is similar to your topics of sustainability, ESG, digital transformation, and so on. And we talked about social responsibility, but the conversation never got very far. Businesses' social responsibility was to, this is where each of the conversations kind of ended up, is to pay a living wage, take care of the employees and help them to put food on the table. At about that time, the environment was starting to be talked about. The EPA was just formed in 1972, so it was still early in the environmental sort of world. And then when I think of today, how far we've come, where we can have very meaningful, in-depth conversations about ESG and about sustainability on many, many different levels of the earth, of humanity, of the language, of so many different levels that we can talk about sustainability. So a lot of progress. And then if we flip that to 40 years ahead, so that would be in 2060 or something like that, what will the topics that started out as social responsibility be? And we're going to be talking about a lot of ethics in government and stratification issues. Some today, but certainly in much deeper in the future. So so that's one thought that comes to mind, and that is the progress that we've made and where we're going to go from here. And the second thought is that even when we talk about sustainability and ESG and so on, what I think we are going to be judged for by future generations is the topic of stratification. That is, all of these digital transformation technologies, are they making the stratification better, or are they making the stratification worse? And I think in most cases they're doing both, right? Uh, so, artificial intelligence, for example, in many cases is making life better, but in a lot of cases is making life not so good. It's similar to conversations we have about, for example, COVID. It's awful, and with all apologies to anybody who's been badly touched by COVID, it brought many good things. For example, we have known how to have telemedicine and to have access to medicine from faraway places. We've known that. They started doing that back in the late 90s. So for 25 years, we've known how to do it. Now, all of a sudden, with COVID, we implemented that over a weekend, if you can believe that, over a weekend. A very good thing. Opens up the access for healthcare, for remote learning, and so on. So there are two sides to every coin, and especially every one of the new technologies that's coming along. So that's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, Isabella. Does that? And there's probably some other thoughts we could get into on that as well.
Thank you, Bill. By the way, I want to mention also, because I have a rare opportunity to have two futurists, and I'm more in the present. I don't know how to qualify myself, but Isabella's book, it's also about the future, and you touched on the role of artificial intelligence, and the fact that, and interestingly, as a human characteristic, we blame artificial intelligence for being biased. But the bias is coming from the data, and data is coming from humans. But we don't say humans are biased, we say AI is biased. But I would like to take the conversation to sort of a next step, and that it's really, you talk about the biggest impediment in order for companies to adopt the planning backward, envisioning the future approach that you describe it so clearly in your book. Would you want to give us a little bit of context for that?
So,
what it is, and how should it play in an ideal scenario?
right. So let's start with traditional strategic planning. And that's been around since just after the Second War, and it started getting implemented into the largest businesses in the 60s and to smaller businesses. And there are tools that you use with strategic planning. There's SWOT analysis and PESTEL analysis and voice of the customer and so on. This, and it's not at all applicable to today, and it's a danger to use today. The traditional strategic planning using these tools at best is extrapolative. It's linear. Look at SWOT analysis. What are my strengths? How can I use these strengths better? Same for weaknesses and so on. It's extrapolative. Whereas envision the future, which is our approach, says, let's use the exercises that we've come up with. Let's use these exercises so that the planning team, which is made up of inside people, there's a whole bunch of rules for how we put together a team. It's not the C-suite, for example. And then we lead or empower the planning team to look at various aspects of the future, envision the future. One of the exercises we call, well, the first one we call Wake Up. That's the getting people out of the rut, plugging them into all the good data points that are floating around out there from futurists like Isabella, who sees some things, they see the data points and so on. So Wake Up is the first one, and the second one is the future of ... And the planning team comes up with a list of areas to spend time on. And if I'm facilitating that particular group, then healthcare and education are going to be on that list. If it's a manufacturing company, they may want to put AI on that list, 3D printing, and so on. So we make up a list of 8 or 10 or 12 topics, and then we take 1, 2, or 3 weeks on each one, where we talk about it. Everybody goes off and finds some new data points about the subject and so on. Sometimes we'll bring in subject matter experts and so on. But after 3 weeks of talking about education, we've probably looked at the topic from dozens of different angles, much more than you can do by yourself. One person can't do this by themselves. You have to have an engaged team to do that. And once you've done that with 10 or 12 subjects, you really have a pretty good idea of 2030 or 2040. And by the way, it's not, there's no precision in what we're doing. I can't tell you what the Dow Jones stock market is going to be on March 8th in 2030. Can't do that. But I can tell you what trends are going to intersect other trends, and what data points are just shiny objects, clickbait. Headlines are great for using clickbait, right? But the shiny objects, the new inventions, say a driverless car, will not impact society. It's a shiny object, it's clickbait, it's real exciting. I'd love to have one in my own driveway. I take all my friends and neighbors over and say, look, no steering wheel, no gas pedal. And that would be really neat. But by itself, it is not going to change society. What will change society is the ripple effects that come off of that shiny object. So, for example, fewer traffic fatalities. This year we had somewhere around 40,000 traffic fatalities. Around the world, it's 1.25 million traffic fatalities. When driverless cars are fully implemented, and we should pass the halfway point around 2040, when that's fully implemented, the traffic fatalities will decrease by a factor of 1,000. So we'll have 40 deaths a year, not 40,000. That's a ripple effect. And there are ripple effects of the ripple effects. So, for example, do we need as many doctors? Do we need as many lawyers? Because nobody's going to be suing each other because of their terrible driving or their texting while they're driving or whatever. Will we need as many? And you just go right down the list. That's a ripple effect string. At the end of every ripple effect string is an ethics or a governance issue, or both. And we as humans have been very, very poor, very bad at anticipating ethics and governance issues ahead of time. We're always running to catch up. So the more we talk about it, and language is the carrier that brings the future. The three of us are creating the future right now simply by talking about it.
Thank you, Bill. And on this topic, actually, I wanted to mention that Isabella has a book that asks lots of questions and doesn't provide answers. So to your, projection of the future, there is not a single answer on how the future will look. But I think it's the time to ask ourselves questions. And as you said very well, we shouldn't look at, I like the metaphor of shiny objects. because I'm just reading about the collapse of the bitcoins and so on, and this is another example, if you want, on how unpredictable and non-linear the future is, and how ripple effects will happen, will be the next days, the next weeks, and can be significant. And moving to that, each transformation process has its large level of resistance. You mentioned at the end it's ethics, at the end it's acceptance. But how do you see this resistance? How can we address it actually in the industry? Because any transformation process eventually means change. And if to believe psychologists, 80-90% of people do not like to change. Don't like change.
Generally, people do, right. And I don't use that word, and I was just waiting for that word to come up, but I don't use the word change. And one of the approaches that I use is discussing it historically, because historically we have had lots of change. Remember the first industrial revolution, when the Luddites broke into the factories in England and smashed the machines. And each of the industrial revolutions, each of the next inventions and so on has involved change. So take the smartphone, for example. The first one was shipped in the year 2007. And how many jobs were there that had the job description app developer in 2007? Zero. How many are there today? 9 million app developers. And this is just one small change that is welcomed. More jobs, more tech jobs, more employment. So I like to talk about the benefits that we're going to have. And there have been, without using the word changes, there have been improvements. We drive cars instead of riding horses now. We fly in an airplane. We go to the moon. Lots of changes, and there have been benefits to mankind, benefits to each of the, to sustainability has become much easier because of the improvements that have been made. So I like to take a historical perspective because we're used to change. It's just that people resist it because they like to stay in their comfort zone. They like their silos, and they will fight to protect them. So we have to kind of go around. And the other factor that we like to use is, someone said, what is the biggest factor that will determine whether or not Envision the Future is successful? The biggest single factor we have found by trial and error over the years is the engagement of the CEO. Because everybody else on the planning team is watching the CEO. And if the CEO has reservations or doesn't come to a meeting or is late for a meeting that does not respect the goal of this highly important goal, then other people will do the same. And even people who were highly engaged in the beginning will start, their engagement levels will fall. So, and this is a conversation that I'll have with the CEO at the beginning. Oftentimes I have to go back and have a refresher discussion with the CEO, but the CEO must verbally support, must give an attaboy or rah-rah 60-second talk at the beginning of every meeting. It's imperative that people see where this parade is going.
Very interesting, because you just triggered a real case. I wasn't the CEO, was the CTO in that particular major telecom company in Latin America. And about 10 years ago, we were discussing, and as you said, the technology already existed for video conferencing and so on. Traffic, terrible, as in many places, many congested cities. And my proposal was to replace one day, not the whole week, with telecommuting and reduce the traffic by 20%. And the resistance was palpable. You can feel it. And my argument is, how you guys got to drink Coca-Cola? Because you had to change. You had to change from water from the tap or the river to drink a fizzle. And they couldn't explain it. They didn't take the argument very well. They didn't implement it. And then, as you mentioned, the trigger happened. And this whole company moved overnight to remote work for 2 years. The whole, and the city was empty. It was, like in one of these movies, you walk in the middle of the road and no fear for a car to come and hit you. The traffic disappeared. Right. But I want to go back and give Isabella a little bit of time to ask her questions.
No, I think you're asking great questions, Manuel. I'm kind of just indulging in this conversation, daydreaming.
As a co-host, is no free ride, Isabella.
Yeah, I was kind of just indulging and daydreaming about everything that could happen as Bill was, sharing his thoughts about the rippling effect and about why people don't want to change and everything. It's definitely old topics for me to revisit, to think about, every time we think about future. One of the things I recently relate to a lot, it's the future change can be something related to the present, which give people a little bit, security to take this step instead of completely disruptive. That could mean a small change. That could mean a small dream, a small goal instead of a big goal. So what do you think about that, Bill?
I think that's a very good idea, because we will still be neighbors and have friends and get together for a beer or dinner and have discussion. That won't change. There are many things that will not change, and if we to minimize the impact, we need to emphasize those things and not emphasize the things that will change. Right? One of the what you made me think of was what we had talked about before. When we start talking about the future, do we see skepticism in the ability to see the future, and this is probably why I think this goes along with the people not liking change and not want to break down the silos. Also, people don't believe that it's possible. I experience skepticism continually. People will say right to my face, "You can't see the future. Nobody knows the future," as if it's against God to guess the future or try to do this work. But yes, I do see it all the time. And my answer to them when they say that, I ask them if they remember a cartoon character by the name of Dick Tracy, who was a police detective back in the 50s. I see Manuel remembers. What did Dick Tracy?
The
yes,
watch.
Exactly. What did he have on his watch? He had a TV screen and a two-way radio, and he could talk. This is in the 50s, and somebody could see the future. How about Star Trek? Gene Roddenberry wrote in the 1960s the Star Trek movies. The Star Trek was on TV, the Star Trek movies. In fact, you remember his communicator or their communicator? It was a flip phone. that was not even sold for 30 more years. It was a flip phone. These people can see the future. Same with 2001: A Space Odyssey, or Star Wars, or any number of them.
Yeah.
Any number of them have disruptive technologies that they're using every day. Some of which we have figured out how to do. Someday, I believe that we will figure out a matter transporter. Beam me up, Scotty. Um, so, to those people who are skeptical about whether or not it is possible to catch glimpses of the future, I offer that advice. Uh, um, I believe that we can, and the way that we do it is with what is all around us right now. There are data points all around us continually. You need to recognize them. You need to be able to evaluate whether or not it's a shiny object, or whether or not it's clickbait, or whether or not, right? And then you put some of these together until you get a trend. And then you put the trends and you start thinking about the trends, and you'll be able to see where the trend lines intersect, where they run parallel. You'll be able to understand that. So that's what our exercises for envisioning the future look
Mhm.
for, those trend lines, and they look for the stratification that they cause, and they look for the ethics and the governance issues that they cause. And when you look at it on multi-layers like that, multi-layers, then you can more fully understand a future topic. So one of the exercises that we use is called the future of dot dot dot.
Mhm.
So the future of healthcare. Um, and if you talk about that for 3 weeks, our meetings are 90 minutes once a week. And when the planning team talks about that, after 3 weeks, Manuel, you used the word palpable, but that future is palpable because you have talked about it from so many different angles that you understand it at a level that the common person who goes to work and sits in the same office they've sat in for 10 years and don't believe you can see the future and don't plug into new thoughts and ideas. So now all of a sudden we've waken them up and we've shown them how to envision the future of healthcare. Then we put that vision, almost palpable, you can almost hold that, and we're going to put it over here on the table beside us, and we're going to do 8 or 10 more subjects. We're going to do education. The reason we do education and healthcare is because those are the two biggest industries in the world, number one, and they are so mired in the past, in best practices, and so reluctant to try anything different. So, uh, so those are the exercises that we go through, and hopefully at the end we'll have 8 or 10 or 12 subjects, and that really makes up the world because you've looked at how the trends overlap, and you've looked how uh, 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 the ripple effects often are the same. The ripple effects of automation mean not so much repetitive or dangerous work, right? That means you're going to have to retrain those workers. It doesn't mean fewer jobs. It means you have to upskill them. And at the same time you're doing that, please upskill your managers. This is one of my hot topics.
Well, in
Managers
one, yeah, I'm sorry,
need
go
to
ahead.
be they they're stuck. You want to talk about an industry or a classification that's stuck in the past? Is managers. If you're at your desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and you stay there until 5 o'clock, the manager can check that box. Yes, he's a good loyal employee. He's always here, right? That doesn't mean anything. And now that we're working from home, working remotely, managers are realizing they do not have the metrics to judge productivity of their workers. But that's been the case forever, for thousands of years. Managers only have to be tough bosses or have a big stick or something, right? They need to mentor, not monitor. They need to mentor. They need to provide the environment that people can get fully engaged. So that's another thing that is becoming better as time goes on, and that is we need to upskill our managers.
And I think we have to bring them to the point to realize that their role is as much cultural, as much as technical education, as much as uh, conduits, if you want, especially in large organization, between the executives and the developers and the working levels.
Yeah, agreed. And to that end, I strongly suggest to every company out there that you stop calling your HR people HR. I am not a resource. I'm not coal or water or a resource that you use when you want to. I'm a human being, and you have to help me to develop my talents. I don't know everything that's needed for this job or what the job is going to need 10 years from now. Together, we will develop the talent. So I would like to rename that department all over the world. I'd like to rename that talent development, not human resources. I am not water or coal.
Very interesting. And, as you're going through all this series of movies and so on, one gap which I identify is my career in high tech. It's actually, we are using actually these metaphors, these movies, these books, Jules Verne, for instance, Captain Nemo, an electric submarine. Well, what do we have today? Electric submarines. Nautilus was the first electric submarine powered by atomic energy, right? Converted to electricity, and so we use this. But I think and I'm thinking of technologists like myself, we fail to communicate. We have a communication gap. We always look at the shiny object, the shining technology. We want to build another invisible man, like in H.G. Wells. But we fail to communicate what is the value to humans. So we bring it as a change, always as a big change. And as you said, the systems are inertial system. Why we have HR? Because HR can account, can be measured. They use KPIs for measurements, as you said very well. They use KPIs to measure performance, and now they know who is the top 10% and top bottom percent. I have only one question to complement your point about HR. When you hire, why do you hire the bottom 10% if you know there are the top bottom 10%? Why you hire them? You shouldn't hire people that are wrong for the job. You hire them, you process, and 3 years later you find out, or 6 months later you find out you hired what's wrong with the process.
This is one of the skills that management needs to take a big step up on. Their hiring, their path to a hire can be much improved, and the organization benefits from that. There's no really good way to teach management except by mentoring, and we just don't do that well enough. I'm hoping in the future, as we think more about developing talent and less about headcount and collecting timesheets and so on, what HR's real job should be. So I think that conversations like this are very fascinating, and one of the reasons Isabella, I'm going to mention age. So, and I apologize, but for so many years I was too busy climbing the corporate ladder, or putting food on the table for my kids, or mowing the grass, or taking care of the house. I didn't have these thoughts. So when I slowed down and started working half days, which is what I do now with my clients, I have time to write, and I have time to think, and I have time to have these discussions. And it's amazing. It's amazing, right? And you mentioned, Manuel, uh, conversations and the importance of passing on the good things, the good ripple effects of what we've just manufactured. Or this is something that I am concerned about because our ability to have conversations has gone down a lot. So, for example, my daughter, if she's in the next room, she'll text me. She won't get up, come over, and say, "Hey, Dad, what do you think about this?" Or, she'll text me. Right? It's one way. I don't get any of the contextual clues of seeing that her face is either angry or upset or happy. I don't see that. I get a text that's not spelled right, and there's bad punctuation in it. Right? So I don't know if she's so. We're putting our own barriers between us. I remember growing up as a kid, we would sit around the dinner table for an hour or two afterward, talking with mom and dad and our brothers and sisters and so on. We don't do that now. And each step we take, like with virtual reality or mixed reality, we can go into our own world that we've created. We don't need to talk to anybody, right? We don't need to have negative consequences of something we can do because I've just programmed in the experience that I want to have, whether it's downhill skiing or whatever it is. I've got it here, and I don't need to have conversations. Wait till we get to the metaverse. Wait till we get to the metaverse. We will not need to interact with each other, and we'll have personal robots who will do, just like Siri or we sort of have that now. Do you know that a quarter of Americans use Siri or one of those other to ask questions, and something like three-quarters of Google questions put to Google are put together verbally, are submitted verbally, and not by typing on a typewriter. Huge differences. Huge differences. So I'm concerned about the future of conversation. Where are we teaching people how to have meaningful conversations and not yell at each other and be tribal and call each other names? That's what a lot of conversation has come to. And so hopefully we will recognize this and take some steps to have more conversations, talk more.
And I think, Bill, conversations are actually the human way of acquiring knowledge. And what you pointed out, the technology brings us mostly information. And information is not knowledge. It's not actionable.
I like that.
And knowledge is not wisdom.
And knowledge is not wisdom, and wisdom, like good the wine or good cheese takes time to mature. It is not. It's a layered, as Bill very well mentioned. It's a layered process. It's not a single layer that takes information into knowledge and knowledge into wisdom. So very, very good point. I definitely like it, Isabella and Bill. Time is going fast, so maybe you ready for the last question, Isabella?
Bill is like, what?
But before going there, I would like to invite Bill for part 2 of this conversation because we're not done by any mean or measure. So please go ahead.
I felt like the last part Bill shared was just warming up. I felt like that's even the highlight of this whole kind of talk, it brings back to the humanity, the human nature part. How do we proceed as a human, and all to reserve all these valuable quality human characters and behaviors and things like that. So that was very authentic. Thank you so much, Bill, for opening up your personal story to illustrate, right? To show us what's your real concern and things like that. Well, usually we just let the guests to give us a quick takeaway, to our audience, whether as a summary of what you've shared or just something you think, here you go, 3 things you want to keep in mind in navigating the future, or one thing, top one.
So a friend of mine uh, said these words
Yeah.
when she was talking about the future a number of years ago. And she said, the pace of change today is the slowest you'll see for the rest of your life. And I've been thinking about that. Not a day goes by that I don't think about that. How to keep up with it, how to prepare for it, how to, and after this, after this period of digital transformation, it won't go on forever. Why will it end? What lies beyond it? Just like in the Dark Ages, the Renaissance came after that, a flowering of humanity. I also don't like the word humanity. When I look up the word humanity, it's circular. All the definitions go back to human. And the humans that I know are both good and bad. Humans make war. Humans kill each other. But when we say humanity, we're excluding all the bad things. So anyhow, that's just a pet peeve of mine. The future's coming, and I think it's possible. In fact, it's not only attractive to think about it, it's attractive for me to think about it, but I think it's very necessary to think about. And that goes back to something that I don't think we mentioned, and that was purpose. Each one of us has a purpose. And now that my kids are all grown, and the corporate ladder has been climbed, what is my purpose? Why do I get out of bed in the morning? What is my purpose? Can you see this?
Very well.
Yes.
That's Noah. He was 18 months. Now he's 6.5 years. He's in first grade. My kids and my grandkids especially are my purpose. And the reason why I need to see the future, is because Noah will not learn the way that I learned. Certainly not the way I learned. He won't learn the way his parents learned in the 90s. For example, how do I teach Noah about money? Very differently from the way I learned about money. I shoveled walks and I got mowed grass if I wanted anything. And at the end of doing that, I could hold it in my hand. I think we talked about that last time. The power of the sense of touch is the strongest of any of the senses. And when I looked at that money, that was the payoff. Well, they're going to stop making currency somewhere around the year 2040. Money to Noah is so completely different than money was to me at that age. So how do I teach him about money? Just go to the bank and get some more, he says. And everything that he does, he's doing games right now that are early stage coding. We're teaching him how to code at 6 years old. In high school, he will be using virtual reality. They're learning differently than we learned, and we need to help them learn. We need to make it understandable to them. And we need to explain this doggone world that we're in, right? And help him make a better world. We need to help make the world a little bit more ready for him when he gets out into the working world in another 10 or 15 years or something. So that's my purpose. And we need to think about our purpose every day.
So shall we make our next topic purpose and the future, or the future of purpose? We can talk offline and continue, but I like it to bring it to this point of not definitely end, but the next session, next meeting, next talk, as you said.
Thank you, Bill.
Talk.
I would like to do that.
That was wonderful. To a purposeful future. Let's wrap up this conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time for all your sharing insights, personal heartfelt stories and observations. And thank you to all our audience for tuning in, for being part of this process. We'd love to see you every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG interview series with thought leaders like Bill, big thinkers, where you can gain new perspectives on how to mitigate risk and navigate the future by integrating ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. So until the next episode, goodbye for now. Bye, everyone. Bye,
Bye-bye.
Bill. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Isabella. Bye, Bill. Thank you.